You guys won't believe what Clarisse put on her resume. That's how Naomi, my sister, opened dinner. No warm-up, no wine-induced grace period. Just a sharp little line flung across the table like it was harmless. Everyone laughed. My father smirked. My mother looked down at her plate. And I sat very still. Naomi wasn't done. Tutoring, GED prep, nonprofit outreach, she read off each word more cutting than the last. It's like she Googled volunteer work and copied the whole list. The table lit up, mouths open in delighted laughter. A cousin did a slow clap. Another pretended to faint from the shade. To them it was fun. To me, it was familiar. I stared down at my plate. White ceramic, probably crate and barrel. It looked too smooth to hold anything sharp, yet somehow I was bleeding inside. Then someone, her husband, I think, turned to me and asked, "So what do you actually do, Clarisse, like for real?" I looked up and said quietly, "I help people prepare for hard conversations." He blinked like I'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. Naomi jumped in with a new story, and the tide of chatter rolled on interest rates, preschool recitals, someone's dog on anti-anxiety meds. But something in me cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, quietly, like a seam splitting under the surface of something polished. I excused myself halfway through dessert and locked the bathroom door behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the mirror, at the face I'd learned to shrink when needed. I wasn't embarrassed. I was erased. On the way back to the table, I passed Naomi's curated photo wall: birthdays, beach trips, graduations. Dozens of moments. Not one photo of me. The wall told a story, and I was edited out. I sat back down, smiled politely, complimented Naomi's tart, washed my plate. Thanked her for having me the choreography of someone trained to never disturb the mood, even when choking on it. Then I slipped out quietly, coat in hand, keys between my fingers. The cold air stung, and I let it clear the last traces of whatever had clung to me in that house. That night, I didn't post about boundaries. I didn't call a friend. I didn't even cry. I made a promise. I would never explain myself again. I wouldn't try to make them see me. I would just become someone no one could dismiss. And real becoming doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives in pieces, in quiet resolve, in the kind of silence that follows humiliation and crystallizes into clarity. Somewhere faint but steady, I heard the voice of a federal judge once say something I never forgot. But I'll come back to that later. I thought that dinner ended something. I didn't realize it started everything. Have you ever left a dinner feeling erased, but somehow more awake than ever? Becoming invisible doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow fading, like stage lights dimming before a show. Except in my case, there was no show. Just the dimming. Growing up, I was the quiet sister, the helper, the one who carried bags, held secrets, and smoothed the tension no one else wanted to name. Naomi, she sparkled. She could turn eye contact into currency and jokes into applause. She wore her ambition like perfume, loud, expensive, impossible to miss. I wasn't jealous, but I was tired. Tired of being the built-in babysitter and still getting told I was too strict. Tired of giving thoughtful gifts and being asked if I was trying too hard. Tired of showing up to family dinners and realizing no one actually knew what I did, just that I worked with people. But I knew. I worked with women who'd been told their voices didn't matter. With teenagers who believed they were too broken for a second chance. With men who had been pushed out of schools, homes, and systems that were never meant for them to begin with. I helped people say hard things, and helped them believe someone would stay in the room after they said them. No, that didn't go on a LinkedIn headline. It didn't earn me applause or performance bonuses, but it made a difference. Still in my family, it didn't count. One Christmas, my uncle, warm with cider and carelessness, asked if I ever felt like I'd wasted my degree. Naomi laughed before I could answer. "Clarisse doesn't waste," she said. "She recycles other people's problems." The table erupted. I smiled, because that was my role, to make sure no one had to sit in discomfort, even when I was drowning in it. And while Naomi climbed titles, chased clients, and captioned her wins with hash boss energy, I worked late shifts and side gigs to fund a literacy program no one ever saw. Then one day, a girl I'd mentored for 6 months showed up at my door. Her hands shook as she held out an envelope. "They said yes," she whispered. "I got in. I only applied because you told me I wasn't trash." That night, I cried so hard, I thought something inside me might split open. Not from sadness, but because someone had believed me when I told them they were worth saving. A few days later, I told my mom. She smiled and said, "That's nice, honey. Naomi just got promoted. Did you hear that was the day I stopped attending things? Not out of anger, out of mercy for myself." I declined the brunches. I let the birthday invitations sit unread. When Naomi texted, I replied with a heart emoji. When she called, I let it ring. Eventually, someone said I'd gone off the grid. They weren't wrong, but it wasn't rebellion. It was preservation. I wasn't vanishing. I was redirecting. I didn't want applause anymore. I wanted alignment. And if no one clapped for the life I was building, that was okay. I wasn't building it for them. Not anymore. Not ever again. There's a difference between walking away and giving up. But people who love their own voice rarely notice the difference. After I stepped back from family events, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would notice my absence. Ask about me. Reach out without needing something. No one did. Instead, they filled in the blanks for themselves. Naomi told our cousins I had gone off the grid to do spiritual stuff. My aunt said I was finding myself. My dad told someone at church that I had moved overseas for a fellowship. I hadn't. I was 10 minutes away, just no longer interested in proving I belonged. The truth, I was rebuilding, not in a glamorous way. I didn't launch a company, I didn't write a book, I didn't become a TED speaker. I just started showing up differently. I stopped shrinking in rooms where people confused kindness with weakness. I stopped nodding when I disagreed. I stopped tolerating being interrupted. I got quiet, but with a different texture, not the silence of erasure, but the silence of clarity. I enrolled in an online policy and ethics program part-time. I started journaling again. I took long walks without music. I said no to unpaid emotional labor. And slowly, painfully, I let go of the fantasy that if I just did enough, they'd finally clap. One Saturday morning, I stopped by the library near the courthouse for a volunteer training. I was early. As I waited for the coordinator, a woman walked up and said, "Excuse me, are you Clarisse Wells?" I nodded. She smiled, almost shy. "I saw your name mentioned in the Internal Digest last week. You drafted that language on youth reentry policy, right?" I blinked. "Yes, I did." "Well, just wanted to say that line about justice requiring dignity stuck with me." Then she walked off, just like that. It wasn't applause. But it was something else, resonance, and it held more weight than 1,000 hollow compliments ever could. Still, it wasn't easy. I still hesitated every time I saw Naomi's name on my phone screen. I still wondered if maybe I was being petty, dramatic, unfair. But then I'd remember the tart, the resume, the Christmas laugh, the photo wall, and I'd remind myself memory is not bitterness. It's record-keeping. It's context. It's survival. One afternoon, I got a call from a judge I had met during a community workshop. Judge Matthew C. Elridge. He asked if I'd be interested in consulting for a restorative justice initiative he was launching. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a corner office or a shiny title, but it came with something I hadn't felt in years: respect. That opportunity turned into something else, and then something else. I started contributing research briefs, sitting in on hearings, drafting language for educational reform proposals. No one in my family knew, not yet. One day, Naomi texted me out of the blue, "Can you look at a resume for my friend's kid? She's applying for some social impact internships. Know he? No, how are you?" Just an ask. I stared at the message for a long time. I thought about replying, thought about saying yes because it's what I'd always done. But instead, I let it sit. 2 days later, she followed up. I still didn't respond. Because what I was building deserved more than obligation. I wasn't bitter, I was becoming. And part of becoming meant not bending every time someone decided I was useful again. Weeks passed. I kept doing the work, quietly, unseen by the people who once laughed across their forks. Then one evening, I walked into a networking event hosted by the Regional Bar Association. I didn't expect much, just a few contacts, maybe some handshakes. But 10 minutes in, I heard my full name over the mic. The keynote speaker had canceled. Judge Elridge was taking their place. He spoke for 20 minutes about justice education and the hidden labor of people who change systems quietly. Then he said, "There's someone in the room whose words have shaped the way I think. She doesn't know I was going to say this. But Clarisse Wells, would you stand?" The room turned. I stood. There was a beat of silence, sharp, suspended like the breath before a storm. Then came the sound: footsteps shifting, a few hands clapping, softly at first, then tapering off. One sharp clap, a pause, another. like a rhythm that hadn't decided if it was celebration or confusion. Across the room, Naomi stood frozen. She was in red, holding a glass of white wine, her lips parted just enough to reveal shock. She didn't clap, but her fiancé did. I didn't wave, I didn't nod, I just stood. Not for them, for myself. Then I sat back down. Because I wasn't there for applause, I was there to witness myself. You can't measure dignity with LinkedIn updates, and you can't fit soul work inside bullet points. For a long time I tried. I tried to translate what I did into things that would make sense to Naomi, to my father, to the relatives who whispered behind wine glasses at family parties, community literacy advocate, policy consultant for educational reform, restorative justice strategist. They all sounded close, but not quite. Because my work wasn't designed to impress. It was built to restore. I didn't mentor kids so I could post about it. I didn't sit with returning citizens to boost a resume. I did it because somewhere deep in me, I was trying to become the adult I had once needed, someone who didn't flinch when hearing hard truths, someone who stayed in the room. That realization shifted everything. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped hoping someone at brunch would finally lean in and say, "Tell me what you really do." I redirected that energy into the work. I rewrote intake forms so they didn't assume guilt. I replaced the word offender with participant. I trained burnt-out teachers to reconnect with empathy. I built systems that whispered dignity instead of broadcasting punishment. And while Naomi climbed higher in her firm's rankings, I chose something else, to work in rooms that didn't have spotlights but changed outcomes anyway. One morning, while leading a training for probation officers, a woman pulled me aside. She had dark circles under her eyes and a posture that looked like it had forgotten rest. She said, "I've been doing this job for 19 years. I forgot why. Until today." She didn't hug me. She didn't post it on LinkedIn. She just went back in the room and stayed the full session, the first time in months, the coordinator said. That was the day I stopped questioning whether my work counted. It did, even if it didn't fit the frame. Weeks later, Judge Elridge emailed, "Could you assist with drafting a federal advisory brief on educational disparity?" I stared at the screen. I thought he'd made a mistake. I replied, "Are you sure you meant to include me?" He wrote back, "I don't ask people to contribute because I like them. I ask because their thinking sharpens mine." I read that line more times than I'd ever admit, not because I needed his approval, but because after years of being politely dismissed, someone finally acknowledged the shape of my mind, not my manners. I didn't tell Naomi. I didn't need to. Then one evening she texted again. "So, are you mad at me? I feel like you're being weird lately." I typed, "I'm not mad. I'm just different now." Then deleted it, because explaining your evolution to someone who once laughed at your seed is like digging up your whole garden to prove the soil was good. Let her think I was weird. Let them all. I kept going, quietly, steadily. I supported women who were exhausted from pretending to be fine. I helped rewrite grant guidelines that once excluded returning citizens. I restructured policy language so schools stopped calling children at risk and started calling them underserved but capable. I received thank you notes from people I'd never met. One came handwritten from a superintendent who said, "Your edits to our code of conduct changed the way we speak about students." And the students noticed. There was no byline. I had asked to remain anonymous, but I knew, and Judge Elridge knew. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. I used to think power meant being seen. Now I know better. Power is shaping outcomes even when no one knows your name. The next family gathering I went to was my cousin's engagement party. Naomi, of course, was there in a tailored jumpsuit that looked like it had its own agenda, and earrings that clinked like applause waiting to happen. She spotted me from across the room. Her expression flickered recognition mixed with something else. Not quite envy, not quite confusion, just recalibration. She waved, like nothing had ever happened. Like the tart, the resume. The years of silence were just haze in the rear view. I waved back, not with anger, not with softness, just neutral. Later, as we stood near the dessert table, she leaned over and said, "I heard you've been working with some judge. Someone mentioned it at our office. Said your name came up in a closed session. You doing some kind of research?" I took a bite of lemon cookie. Chewed, swallowed. "Something like that," I said. She laughed a little too loudly. "That's so Clarisse, all mysterious and wise. Still saving the world in the shadows," I smiled. Let her talk. She pivoted to her firm's new biotech client. I nodded where appropriate, complimented her earrings, but I didn't explain. I didn't connect the dots. Because for too long, I'd mapped myself onto other people's expectations. Now I was my own country, and I liked the borders I'd drawn. There are certain moments you don't realize are a test until you've already passed it. When I received the invitation to Naomi's office gala, I almost deleted it. It wasn't from her, of course. It was from the firm's event coordinator, a woman I'd never met using a template. You are cordially invited to the Eden and Cranefall Impact Gala, honoring regional contributions to civic progress. My name was printed on the guest list, because apparently one of the judges had submitted my name to be recognized. I stared at the email for a long time, not because I was unsure of going, but because I already knew how the room would feel, the side glances, the micro-assessments, the too loud compliments on my outfit as a cover for surprise that I even belonged there. I RSVP'd yes. I wore a black jumpsuit, no sparkle, no dramatic heels. Just clean lines and confidence. When I walked in, the lighting was low, the music orchestral, and the smell of money subtle but undeniable. Naomi spotted me almost instantly. She blinked like she was recalibrating. "Clarisse," she said, walking toward me with her signature half-hug. "Didn't know you were coming tonight. You look good." "I was invited," I said gently. She paused, then laughed like it was funny. Like she hadn't just confirmed she never read the guest list. I mingled, quietly. I met an assistant DA who quoted one of my anonymous policy briefs back to me, not knowing I was the one who wrote it. A local university president thanked me for my research, but called me Caroline. I didn't correct him. I was past needing name tags to feel real. Then it happened. Near the end of the evening, the MC took the mic. "Tonight we honor a few individuals whose work in the justice and education systems has left an indelible impact in our region. One of those individuals is here with us." I sipped my sparkling water. "Her name is Clarisse Wells." A murmur swept through the room. I stood. The spotlight was gentler than I imagined, like standing in a window of afternoon light. I walked to the stage, accepted a plaque I hadn't expected, and turned toward the crowd. Naomi was near the back, frozen. She didn't clap. Her fiancé did. I saw his hands move before hers. Later, he found me by the exit. "I had no idea you were that Clarisse," he said. "She talks about you like you're her sweet but lost older sister." I smiled. "Well, now you've seen the resume." He blinked, then smiled too. I didn't stay much longer. I took a photo with the plaque only because the coordinator asked, but I didn't post it. I didn't text anyone. I just walked outside and let the night hold me. There was something about being seen that night, not just noticed, but truly seen, that didn't feel like vindication. It felt like closure. Because the truth is, I never needed Naomi to see me clearly. I only needed to stop shrinking in her shadow. The next morning I got a text from Naomi. "You looked good last night. Congrats or whatever." No emoji. I didn't respond. Not because I was mad, but because I was done translating my worth into her dialect. I had passed the test, the one where you enter a room that once terrified you and realize you've outgrown it. I spent the rest of the weekend organizing books for a new community reading room we'd just opened. No plaque, no speeches, just kids in beanbags and the scent of fresh paper. And that not the gala, not the plaque was where I felt most like myself. There's a different kind of quiet that comes after you've stopped needing to be seen. It's not emptiness. It's not resignation. It's peace. In the weeks after the gala, I moved differently, not dramatically, not with a chip on my shoulder, but with the calm certainty of someone who no longer asks for directions in a place she's already mapped. I took early morning walks without headphones. I stopped rehearsing responses in my head before saying no. I drank my coffee slowly and stopped rushing to meet the imaginary standards of someone else's urgency. And when people interrupted me mid-sentence in meetings, I let the silence hang, long enough for it to make them uncomfortable, not me. I wasn't performing invisibility anymore. I was simply refusing to be erased. My work continued. I helped coordinate a citywide initiative that matched adult learners with underutilized school libraries after hours. I assisted a juvenile court in rewriting its intake process to remove stigmatizing language. I wrote anonymously for journals that ended up quoted by policymakers who would never know my name. And it was enough. More than enough. Then one day, a friend forwarded me an invitation. A panel discussion at the state university titled, "Who Builds the Invisible Bridges?" The speaker list included researchers, lawyers, and me. I hadn't submitted anything. Judge Elridge had. Quietly, again, I accepted. Not because I needed the recognition, but because I'd learned that sometimes stepping forward isn't about spotlight. It's about showing someone else what quiet power looks like. When the day arrived, I wore gray slacks, a soft blouse, and flat shoes. No statement jewelry, no blazer. I didn't want to look like authority. I wanted to look like access. The room was full. The moderator introduced me last. She read my bio, the parts I'd finally allowed to be public. When I took the mic, I didn't clear my throat. I didn't apologize for existing. I began with a story, one about a young woman I'd helped who was told by her family she'd never get out of the system. She went on to earn a master's in social work. Her name wasn't Naomi, but the pain was familiar. I spoke for 20 minutes. I spoke from the gut, not the resume. And when I finished, the room was still. Then they clapped. It was polite at first, then stronger. Then people stood. I didn't cry. I didn't beam. I nodded. I received it. But in my head, I was back at the community reading room, back where there was no applause, just pages turning. Afterward, a woman approached me, maybe in her 50s, professional, poised. She said, "I'm not usually emotional, but what you said, it reminded me of my younger sister. She passed 5 years ago. She worked in silence too. We didn't say much more. We just hugged. Sometimes the most honest connection isn't in the words. It's in what remains when the words are done." I drove home with the windows down. The air was cool. I wasn't replaying what I said. I wasn't planning what to say next time. I just drove. That night, Naomi called. Not texted. Called. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up. She was quiet at first. Then she said, "You were really good at the panel. One of my colleagues was there. She didn't even know we were sisters." I said nothing. She went on. "I've been thinking. Maybe I don't really know what you do, but I see it's not small." Still, I didn't fill the silence for her. I waited. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry for how I made you feel. I thought I was being funny. I wasn't. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big speech, but it was real, and I received it." "I know," I said. "Thank you." She asked if we could have coffee sometime. I said yes, not because everything was fixed, but because healing isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it loops back not to reopen the wound, but to close it gently. The next day, I walked to the library early. The sun was barely up. I unlocked the side door and turned on the lights. The reading room was quiet, still carrying the warmth from the night before. I walked over to the small shelf in the corner, the one filled with thank you notes from students, staff, and parents. I ran my fingers along the edges of their words. There was no microphone here, no stage, just the quiet echo of impact. And that's when I understood the loudest applause I'd ever hear wouldn't come from a crowd. It would come from a life lived in alignment. Somewhere between being overlooked and being honored, something in me settled. Not settled for less. Not settled into silence, but settled into something truer than performance belonging. In the months that followed the panel and Naomi's apology, things didn't suddenly become perfect. She didn't transform into someone new overnight. And I didn't forget the years that shaped us. But the sharp edges between us softened. We had coffee. We talked about neutral things at first, work, weather, the state of the world. Then little by little, our conversations became less about proving and more about presence. One afternoon, we sat in a park near her office. Leaves were falling in that heavy, beautiful way only October allows. She said, "I always thought you were doing all this community work because you couldn't cut it in the corporate world. I didn't know it was your choice." I nodded. It was. She looked at me genuinely. "You don't want to be known." "I want to be useful," I said. "Known is optional." She didn't respond. But I could see the words sitting with her, not dismissed, not deflected, just sitting. That was enough. Meanwhile, my work continued to evolve. I took on fewer projects, but with more depth. I mentored young professionals entering justice reform fields. I co-developed a curriculum for high school seniors about civic power. I began writing again, not for policy briefs, but for myself. I wrote about invisibility, about dignity, about why some of the most impactful people I'd ever met never had their name on a door. One of those essays was published in a small literary journal. It wasn't viral. It didn't get thousands of views. But one day I got an email from a teacher in Montana who had printed it for her students. She said they don't talk in class much. But after reading your piece, 3 of them stayed behind to ask how to volunteer. That was the moment I knew my work was never about being remembered. It was about helping others remember themselves. Naomi came to one of my community lectures that spring. She sat in the back, took notes. Afterward, she came up and hugged me. Not performative, not stiff, just sincere. We didn't need to talk about who had changed more. We just needed to witness each other. Later that week, she sent me a photo. It was of a blank notebook page. She wrote, "Started writing again. Don't know what I'm doing, but I think I need to try." I replied, "That's how you know it matters." And somehow, in that quiet space where we stopped competing and started connecting, a new chapter began. Not a sequel to the pain, a parallel to the healing. I no longer needed the story to end with triumph or vindication. I didn't need her to cry or grovel or undo the years. I just needed my own story to be whole, whether anyone else clapped for it or not. And now it was. It was in the library where a student shyly asked if she could bring her little brother to story time. It was in the letter I received from a former inmate who said, "You made me feel like I was still human." It was in the mirror where I finally saw a woman who no longer needed proof. Some stories aren't meant to be closed like books. They're meant to be lived like gardens, tended, revisited, shared. So if you're waiting for your full circle moment, the apology, the applause, the recognition, let me offer this instead. Sometimes your growth is the only ending you need. Sometimes standing tall in the life you built quietly, patiently, persistently is more than enough. And if someone who once laughed at your seed finally comes around to admire the tree, let them, but don't wait for them to water it. You've already done the growing. Sometimes a story doesn't leave you. It wraps around your own memories. It reminds you of the dinner you didn't speak up at, the voice you muted to keep the peace, the quiet strength you didn't know was growing. That's what this was for me. This story isn't just about Clarisse. It's about every person who's ever been underestimated, misunderstood, or uninvited, and chose not to burn bridges, but to build a life beyond them. If this story sat with you, if it reminded you of your own becoming, I'd love to walk beside you through more. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this: quiet, powerful healing. Stories that don't scream, but stay. And if this one found you at just the right time, comment, "This is my garden. We're still blooming, and we're not alone."